Stay tuned for the second half of the Wake Up Mission Show.
And here we are in the second half of our show. Today we are honored to have Gerald Celente. I've been following him for several years. I want to thank my friend Gerald Griffin and my late great friend Aaron Russo for getting me to know his work. He actually started back in 1980 founding the Trends Research Institute. You can go to trendresearch.com. I like this man because he speaks the truth. He's the publisher of Trends Journal. Here we are. You've seen him on Fox News, Good Morning America, you name it, to the Today Show. Gerald Celente. Gerald, thank you so very much for being on our show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
No, we appreciate you. I've been watching you for years. You know, I was at Aaron Russo's home, and he was screening his film at the time, America, Freedom to Fascism. And, you know, we just started talking, and I learned about you, and I'm glad that I did. And, of course, Edward Griffin. And so thank you. Thank you for what you do. You give good results, and you tell the truth, which we don't see a lot today. But I wanted to start out with, you recently said the following, that the trends in 2015 would be a manipulation of everything. Now, Randy and I talk about manipulation of our government all the time on this show, but what did you mean by the manipulation of everything, Gerald?
Well, actually, the story is written by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who, of course, you know, was the former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan, and he's one of our contributors to the magazine. And what we were looking at is the grand manipulation. We started with, of course, the banking system. This isn't capitalism. People better grow up about that. It's the merger of state and corporate powers. It's fascism by definition. And bankism is the ruling elite. And these aren't just empty words, they're facts. For example, in capitalism, there's no such thing as too big to fail. So the entire system is being manipulated by the banking system in Wall Street. And you look at the numbers don't lie. When they began quantitative easing in 2009, the Dow has gone from 8,000 to now it's over around 18,000. You look at Japan, the same thing. Their Abenomics, the central bank. Their stock market is at 15-year highs, while the GDP is back to 2012 levels. So the average person keeps losing. Matter of fact, here in the States, 95% of the wealth since quantitative easing began went to the 1%, and median household income in the USSA is now below 1999 levels. So the grand manipulation.
Hold on. I love, Gerald, that you said USSA because that's what Randy and I always say. We're no longer living in a republic. So, you know, I just wanted to confirm that. And right before you came on, as you continue your thought there, Gerald, we were talking about the fact of the extremes between the billionaires in China and the poverty in China. And we just read a report out of California where California has the most billionaires in the state and the highest poverty in the entire country. So when you talk about the 1%, you know, there you have in the widening gap. And you're correct. We haven't lived in capitalism in my entire lifetime. I've never seen it. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, as you keep going around and you're talking about the billionaires, the Oxfam study that came out about a month ago showed that next year, 1% of the people on the planet control 99% of the wealth. So it goes back to, and then you saw the Pew Research Center study that came out recently. It showed that the gap between the rich and the poor in the United States is back to levels that were worse than during the Gilded Age. And this is the Pew Research Center. You know, this isn't some lefty organization. And so when you're looking at the real numbers and the hard facts, they tell the story. So it goes back to the grand manipulation. Right now, we have interest rates at record lows for nearly 10 years. They have not raised interest rates. What does that mean? once upon a time, you mentioned that I began the Trends Research Institute in 1980. They used to have this quaint little thing called a savings account, and people used to put their money in the bank for retirement, and they would get an interest on that money that was greater, oftentimes with CDs much greater than the rate of inflation. Now you put your dough in the bank, and what do? You get nothing. Why?
Right.
Because all that cheap money goes back to why the Dow, why the Nikkei, why the European indexes are all at new highs. The reason is that the gang, they call them investors. They're not investors. They're high-stake gamblers. What they do is they borrow dough for nothing. And what they do, you're looking at half of the stock market gains have come from companies buying back their stocks. Today, you saw the market going up because the banks got a green light to buy back stocks. So what they do is they buy back the stocks, they drive up the prices, and they pull their dough out. And the other part of the raise in the markets have gone from mergers and acquisitions so that we, the people, don't have to ever worry about owning our own business. Because in Slavelandia, you got all this cheap dough,
James,
and you have
I
the
love that. Slavelandia. I'm sorry, that's brilliant. Okay, continue.
Well,
I'm
it
so
is,
sorry.
because now what you have, whether it's in the newspaper industry, this group called Gatehouse. I mean, how about Crap House? They're the ones that are buying up all the newspapers all over the country. And what they're doing is they're firing staff, closing copy desks, consolidating everything. The prices are skyrocketing of the stock. Meanwhile, they're ripping out the core. So you have, and then you look again, going back to 1980 when I was a young guy. They used to have things called pharmacies before they had CVS and Walgreens and Rite Aid. They had stationery stores before they had Staples and Office Depot, and now that's being bought out, and it's only going to be Staples. Then they used to have other quaint things, like they call them haberdashers and ladies' dress shops, and now they're called Target and Walmart. It's Slavelandia. Where are you going to get a job? You can't create your own business. The politicians in this country have sold us out.
Yes, they have, and you're right. And it's the road to serfdom, as F.A. Hayek so eloquently wrote about. And something else that you said is that the unemployment rate is a rigged game. And Randy and I talk about these numbers all the time on this show. They lie, and then those who are no longer in the system, they're not even counted. I want you to comment on that because, you know, we don't see a reprieve in this, Gerald, and we want to know what you're saying out there.
Again, the numbers don't lie. And again, that story was written by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, part of the manipulation. It's in finance, it's in government, it's in military, you name it. It's across the board. So what they do is they use propaganda and phony numbers. And here, I'll give you an example. Again, current events form future trends. That's what we do. We look at the current events. So you look at the numbers that came out today. The stock market went up on the great news that for the third month in a row, retail sales are down. And that is because they said that, well, that's great. Maybe they won't raise interest rates and we keep the Ponzi scheme going. So go back to what I just said about retail sales. Now, anybody, even half awake, knows that how could retail jobs be created for the last 3 months when in the last 3 months, December, January, February, retail sales are down.
Right. When we talk about it, Randy and I mention it's, when they're saying that it's up, it's because they increased their numbers. I worked in retail when I was in high school. They hire more during the holiday season, and then they fire you right afterwards after they do their inventory. And if it's a really bad Christmas season, they fire you even before that.
And this was a crummy Christmas season.
Yes.
Again, the numbers are there. We had, I believe it was a 0.9% decline in December, if my memory serves me correct.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the numbers that we're looking at. So the grand manipulation, as you mentioned, once you're off the unemployment rolls, you're no longer looking, you don't count in the USSA. You're gone,
right.
Jack.
Right. So Gerald,
right.
I mean, you're such a clever man, you know. And again, I do. I watch your interviews. You know, I watch your Alex Jones interviews and such. What can people do though? I mean, it's a grim forecast. What can people do?
Here's what you have to. I've been. You know, by the way, I began my career. I used to run political campaigns in Westchester County when it was the richest county in the United States. And I was the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate, and I was a chief government affairs specialist for the chemical industry in the 70s. So I've seen a lot of it. Anyway, one of the ways I made my name in trend forecasting was in 1988, my book Trend Tracking. I predicted there'd be a new I predicted there'd be a new third party. And for some reason, I mentioned Ross Perot.
Yes. Yes.
Right now, we have an opportunity. If people are asking what could be done, we don't have a two-party system. We have a two-family system. We got Bushes and Clintons.
Oligarchy.
Yeah. So now the conditions exist even greater than they did before for a two-party, for a third party. And all you have to do is look what's going on over in Spain. Out of nowhere, in a year, the Podemos party. And that now they could win an election if it was held today. In Italy, you had the Five-Star Movement, and now the Northern League, which they used to consider, you know, the Southern Italians, the Northern League didn't like them. Now they're being smart. They're playing to the austerity measures to which the Southern Italians are also suffering from. They could win an election. You look at UKIP in the UK. You look at the parties in Germany. The Syriza party in Greece, I'm not so sure about them. I think they're a sellout, but nonetheless, they won. So what I'm saying is, you ask what could be done right now. Best thing that could happen is a real viable third party to get rid of the two families that are running the country.
I'm going to ask you, Gerald, because I was asked to run. I ran a Constitution Party here in the state of California for governor, and we did break third-party records. But what was really fascinating to me, because I also was a Ron Paul supporter and, you know, worked and volunteered on that campaign. And the same thing I heard over and over and over again was a third party can never win. A third party can never win, so we have to keep doing the same that we're doing today.
That's what people
can we get
say.
Past that? Yeah.
You know what we need? I'm a believer, by the way, that art is the way of finding the true meaning of the human spirit. And all anyone has to do is look back to the Renaissance. The Renaissance followed the Black Plague, in which some 60% of Europe was decimated. And what made the Renaissance happen was the de Medicis and other families that put the money into initiatives and creativity that brought the human spirit to a higher level. They used to say at the height of the Renaissance, alla Romana e all'antica, in the manner of the Romans and the ancients, to describe the quality of their work. Now think of that word quality and put it into context today. Quality, you go into a Walmart or a Target, it's like going into a big self-storage unit. Quality, look at the junk that they build. Quality, listen to the music. Quality. So what I'm saying is, something we need de Medicis. In the absence of that, people have to, and again, you know the motto of the Trends Journal is think for yourself. I don't tell anybody what to think. I don't care whatever you want to think. You think what you want to think. Don't tell me how to think. It's an even game.
Exactly.
So,
right.
But do you see the trend? Do you believe, based on your knowledge and your experience, that in this next 2016 we could get a viable third-party candidate, or do you think it will take a whole other election cycle?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No. The opportunity's never been better than now. That's what I'm saying.
Awesome.
It's never been better than now. We just need the right person. That you look at the numbers. I mean, you look at the numbers. How many people look so lowly upon Congress? What self-respecting human being could look up to a Bush or a Clinton or an Obama or a Dianne Not-So-Feinstein, a Pelosi, a little Lindsey Graham, a John Insane McCain? What self-respecting human being could look up to these people? And when you look at the numbers, not a lot. The only reason why they're being promoted is because of the prostitutes that suck up, bow down, lick their shoes, and the other thing I can't say what they do. So
we say it on the show. Trust me.
Okay,
so
let you know.
Our listeners know.
Thinking of somebody grabbing their ankles, right?
Yes, yeah. So what I'm saying is the opportunity. I mentioned to you about Ross Perot. In 1992, I got a call. John Connolly wanted to meet me. And, of course, John Connolly was the governor of Texas who took the bullet in the back. And this is 2 weeks before the election. I have a photograph of me, him, and his wife, Nellie, in front of the book depository. It's his first time back, their first time back since the assassination. They didn't even go there when they turned it into a memorial. And he wanted to meet me to figure out, how did I figure this out? And so I flew down there. It was a last-minute thing. Anyway, we're in a limousine in the front of the book depository. What you see where those windows are, that's the side. And he's telling the story of what happened that day. I heard a gunshot. I turned to my right. I knew it was a gunshot because been hunting since I'm a little boy. I turned to my left. There were brains on my shoulder. I knew there were brains because my daddy was a butcher. Yeah, I mean, this story goes on. But and I've written about it. But anyway, we're going back into the Anatole Hotel. And he looks at me and he said, Gerald, I read your book, Trend Tracking. He says, it's a fine piece of work. And I know your heart's in the right place. But you don't have a clue what's going on in this country. And neither do the American people. Because if they did, there'd be a revolution in this country. Now, this is a guy, not only was he the governor of Texas, he was as a Democrat, he was also the head of the United States Treasury under Nixon.
Now that just there. As we always say on this show, connect the dots. There you go. Do you ever believe, and I was part of the End the Fed movement, that because with the controlling families, that we can ever end that?
Absolutely. This is what people don't. When I mention these names, if you think that I say if Bush can, if Obama can, if Clinton can, I can, and you can, unless you think that their mother was better than yours. So not to make this ugly, let's just call it even.
Yes, I love how you think, Gerald. Now, besides the economic news, you also predict that in 2015 there might be a World War III.
Yes, it's on. If the madmen in charge are left in charge, this guy Ashhole or Ashton, that's it, Ashton Carter, the new Secretary of Defense. You want to see a little boy. You want to see a little chicken hawk that doesn't even talk tough, but he talks like a maniac. This is the cat, man. I listen to this guy. I go to the State Department sites. I listen to him go on. It's like going to hear a one of these grade B guys that you send your staff to for management training that walks up and down the aisle with his shirt hanging out as he's talking to the crowd. This guy is a nobody. And you should hear him talk about how we have to give Obama more authority under the authorization to use military force anywhere. And then you hear this other guy, this guy that's been on he just was on Fox this week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they bring on these guys, these former generals, you know. And matter of fact, I was a keynote speaker, me of all people, at VMI in 2000. And I was talking about New Millennium Warfare. And I had lunch with General Anthony Zinni. He was a great guy, by the way. And he was the head of he ran the first Gulf War. And we hit it off. But anyway, this guy, this Robert Scales, you know, he's a retired, you know, major general, this or that, you know, at the War College. Here's what he said. This is somebody that should be put in an insane asylum. Because if I said anything like this, people would be, down my throat, boy, get this guy out of here. He's out of his mind. He's asked by Lou Dobbs about the 3,000 troops that the United States is sending into Eastern Europe. And Lou Dobbs asks him, he said, will that have any effect? And he says, quote, I think to no effect, he answered. It's a game, set, and match in Ukraine. They always use this stupid language, game, set, and match, you know.
Right.
The only way the U.S. can have any effect in this region and turn the tide is to start killing Russians. Killing so many Russians that even Putin's media can't hide the fact that Russians are returning to the motherland in body bags. But given the amount of support we've given to the Ukrainians, and given the ability of Ukrainians themselves to counterattack against 12,000 Russians camped in their country, sadly, that's not likely to happen. And
you know, I recently, Gerald, I've been reading a lot about this, and Putin has made, of course, a lot of bold remarks against Obama, apparently trying not to be part of the New World Order. And I've read, surprisingly enough, and just because I don't watch Fox News, I have to say, I like Lou Dobbs, though. Lou Dobbs is a nice guy. But I don't like propaganda, which, you know, the mainstream media mostly gives. But I did read in alternative news that we were going to start seeing a lot of bashing against Putin. And so you think that's where the World War will start?
Well, listen, I mean, look what this guy's saying.
Yeah.
He's saying more body bags. That's what we have to do is kill Russians.
Yeah.
What if the Russians said we have to get the Americans out of there? We'll get the Americans out of there if we kill more Americans. Oh, my God. Then you would hear it all over the media.
Right. Absolutely. So your predictions, any good predictions for 2015?
As I was saying, that the good predictions are that right now the opportunity to change it has never been better.
Awesome.
And to me, again, what's missing in the element that I believe in, you know, being an Italian, you know, as I say, you know, my heart is my blood is Italian, but my heart's American. I could never be me if I was born anywhere else. And so when
my mom was Italian. Last name Belby.
Ah, there you go.
So
and then when people say to me,
you.
Yeah, when people say to me, you know, Mr. Celente, you should tone it down a little bit. I say, listen, let me get this straight in your head. My blood's Napolitano, and I was born in the Bronx. What do you expect? You know, anybody that knows, you know, you put the two together. You don't have to be even Ashton could figure that one out. But anyway, going back to it, to me, art has to play an element in this. Because, again, to me, art is the way of finding the true meaning of the human spirit. And art is the antidote. Art and beauty are the antidote to fear. And that, to me, is what's missing.
Yes. We were just talking about balance on this show, and we're going to start having a show on Friday, Gerald, where we play some art because we've been far too political. And so anyway, Randy, I know Gerald only had a limited time with us, so do you have any questions before we have to send this great man off to his next appointment?
Well, Gerald, I like your optimism. I wish I could share it. With the elections coming up, it's not like tomorrow, but we all know when they're coming up. And I would like to see other parties. But when you mentioned, the names of the families, do you think that these elections are rigged? Because with the low approval ratings that they're all getting, the same ass clowns keep ending up in office.
Well, of course it's rigged. It's the Bloods and the Crips, the murderers and the thieves. They're running the show.
Yeah.
So it's rigged. But I'm saying the opportunity is now, and it's up to us. People say, what can I do personally? Well, to me, again, this is only what I believe. I'm not telling anybody what they should do. To me, you have to get in shape, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I don't mean spiritually by, the religious sense. I mean in a much, I have a definition for hell. My definition of hell is taking that last breath and knowing you weren't the person you said you were or could have been.
Beautiful. Gerald, I know you have to go, and Zeke made sure that we had to get you out of here on time because I know you're a busy man. It's just been an honor. We thank you. You can come back to this show anytime. Our listeners are your friend.
Oh, thank you. And just listen, something for your mother who's Italian. You know this whole ISIS thing? This whole anti-ISIS campaign is a plot against Italians. How are we going to sell Italian ISIS? Who's going to buy it?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care
Thank you, Gerald.